Could the Detroit Lions be changing the position of a player that they drafted just a few months ago? Over the last few weeks, Giovanni Manu has been the topic of discussion, talking about whether he should continue his development at left tackle or potentially throw in the towel and try transitioning to an interior offensive lineman position. And as much as there is discourse back and forth, there is a good reason to do so. Giovanni Manu's strength as an offensive lineman comes from his size and his power, his ability to overwhelm defensive linemen, and really his biggest flaw is his lateral quickness and agility. His RAS score was very poor in that part of his testing, and he isn't the quickest player. Being 6'7", 360 pounds, he isn't the most nimble of players, and the speed rush does give him issues on the edge. However, over the past couple of games throughout the preseason and over his season of development, has he grown enough to continue warranting his development at left tackle, or should the Detroit Lions move him interior? That's what we're going to take a look at today, taking a look at his preseason tape, his strengths and weaknesses, some quotes from Brad Holmes and Penei Sewell about their potential future starting tackle, and I'll let you guys decide in the comments down below. Should the Detroit Lions move Giovanni Manu to a different position or continue looking to make him the next starting left tackle of the Detroit Lions? With that being said, let's get into it. With Giovanni Manu, the former fourth-round pick from the 2024 NFL Draft, and a shocking one where Brad Holmes traded up into the NFL Draft, gave away future capital, and even a third-round selection to select Giovanni Manu in the fourth round of last year's draft. And there's a lot of excitement about Giovanni Manu. I think the first thing people see when they see Manu on the field is he is a massive mountain of a human being. 6'7", 352 pounds with an 8.82 RAS score, great explosiveness, great speed, and a 34.7-inch arm length. That is well above the average for an NFL offensive tackle. But of course, as we talked about, he is limited in his agility. He isn't the quickest. He isn't the most nimble offensive lineman, and that did show up on tape a few times last preseason. There were speed rushers that were able to set the edge. There were speed rushers that were able to get around him with just their quickness and lateral agility. But more times than not, Giovanni Manu was able to handle it. It gave him problems, and I think it gave up pressures, but very rarely did it result in a sack. Giovanni was very quickly able to adjust and was quickly able to, kind of figure out how to stop that speed rush. It wasn't perfect by any means, but it did get better consistently from weeks 1 to week 3. Now, taking a look at Brad Holmes this offseason, he of course talks about a lot of players. He goes through a lot of press conferences, speaks with the media quite often, and when asked about Giovanni Manu's development, this is what he had to say. He says, if you watch Giovanni Manu in film in OTAs and you compare that to his film in January practices, it's night and day. He is a completely different player. And when you ask him, he says the game has slowed down for Giovanni Manu. He's developed that ability to counter the quickness from the opposing edge rusher, and he looks like an entirely different player from the one we saw in preseasons week 1 through 3. Of course, Giovanni Manu didn't play in the regular season, was a healthy scratch for the entirety of the 2024 rookie season, but considering the fact that even in the preseason, he was probably the Lions' best backup offensive lineman, and saying that from that point he got significantly better should give Lions fans a lot of excitement and a lot of hope for his development at the left tackle position. Now, taking a look at the Lions' offensive line and their depth, at the tackle position, they have 4. They have, of course, Taylor Decker and Penei Sewell as the starters, Dan Skipper, who played a lot of Detroit Lions games last year as kind of the 6th offensive lineman, so rotated in at tight end, rotates in as the backup offensive lineman if it is needed. But Giovanni Manu, of course, did not play. He didn't take a single snap on the season, didn't get a rep, not even in the games that did not count. At the guard position, the Lions are a little bit deeper, but I would say a little bit less top-heavy, right? They have Graham Glasgow, who was a longtime starter in the NFL, struggled last year, but wasn't by any means a horrible offensive lineman. He took a big regression step from 2023, but the Lions still trusted him to go out there, do his job, and I thought he did so at a very average level from an offensive guard of a player for his caliber. They have Christian Mahogany, of course, started in the playoffs as well as in Chicago last year and had 2 great games in his first 2 career starts. Colby Sorsdale, Coyote Awashka are both players that started games for the Detroit Lions over the last few years and have been really successful at doing so. And then they have Netane Moody, a player that they were really excited about in the preseason, but if you believe it, suffered a pretty bad injury at the end of the preseason and wasn't able to participate through most of the practices throughout the year, but is being brought back and was even re-signed to return to the Detroit Lions to give another shot this season. Now, why Giovanni Manu? Why keep him at tackle? And what is the biggest upside to potentially having him as a starting tackle in a few years? Well, obviously, tackle is more important than guard. It is a tougher position to play, it's a tougher position to find, and it is a much tougher position to get high quality starting play out of. Not to say that everybody can play guard in the NFL, but there are very few times that the Detroit Lions have struggled at the guard position, right? They've played Graham Glasgow. They've played Christian Mahogany. Last year they had Kevin Zeitler. But even in the times where they've played Colby Sorsdale, and they've played guys like Kere Awashka, and they've played guys like Evan Brown on the interior, those guys have continued to see success within the Detroit Lions offensive line. But obviously, tackle is a completely different animal. There is so much more space to cover. You are very often left on an island with very little help, and it is just a significantly tougher position to adjust to at an NFL level and to play at a consistently high level as well. But there are a lot of factors that point to the fact that Giovanni Manu very well could be a starting caliber, if not very good caliber left tackle in the NFL. His RAS score is extremely comparable to a guy like Andrew Whitworth, who is a Hall of Fame tackle for both the Cincinnati Bengals and the Los Angeles Rams. And when you compare Giovanni's measurements to the average offensive tackle, it's pretty significant the difference that there is. The average NFL offensive tackle stands at 6'4", 310 pounds with a 34-inch arm length. 34 is considered what the NFL wants in their tackles. 33 is considered the bare minimum. And anything over 34 is considered to be pretty good as far as measurables go. Giovanni Manu, as we've already discussed, stands at 6'7", so has about 3 inches of height on the average offensive tackle. 352 pounds, has about 40 pounds of muscle on the average offensive tackle, and has a 34.7-inch arm span, which might not sound super dramatic, right? A seventh of, a foot, so a seventh of an inch, right? Doesn't sound like a lot for an offensive tackle. Doesn't sound like a lot in general, but in terms of the NFL, when the difference between 33 and 34 inches is undraftable to pretty okay, the difference between 34 and 35 inches is the difference between okay, that's what we expect, to that guy has some special tools and is a player we are going to take pretty high in the NFL draft, even if it's solely for the development potential. Now, I think as far as measurables, Giovanni Manu, of course, like Penei Sewell said, has every measurable that you would want for. And at this point, it's really a mindset thing for Giovanni Manu. It is a, hey, can you adjust? Can you get to that level? And can you play it at a high enough level in order to warrant sticking around at that position? Penei Sewell believes that it can be done. Brad Holmes believes that it can be done. And Hank Fairley has come out and said himself that he believes Giovanni Manu can develop properly. Taking a look at weeks 1 through 3, I thought he took a big step forward. His week 1 performance versus the Giants, comparing that to his week 3 performance versus Kansas City, is night and day in itself. The ability to stop the speed rush was significantly improved. It was something they very clearly looked at. The game slowed down for him even between weeks 1 and 3, so especially through the NFL regular season, practicing every single day against those guys, he got much better. He's a good run blocker. He's incredibly powerful. And I think the biggest thing that Manu has to work on is just being quicker with his hands, being quicker with his feet, getting his hands on the defensive lineman early, because there were times last offseason where the defensive lineman got his hands on Manu's chest. And at that point, he was able to drive Manu a little bit, able to kind of steer the pass rush and win the rep more times than not. Not always getting to the quarterback, but if you were to consider, hey, offensive versus defensive lineman, who was in control, the defensive lineman was more often in control, but very rarely did they actually get to the quarterback. Manu was able to anchor himself very well a lot of the time and was able to keep the defensive lineman away from the quarterback, even if he wasn't fully in control of the rep. And I think that's a very good thing for him to do. Manu's power, and especially if he's able to get his hands on the offensive lineman, are pretty much game over. He ends the rep right there. If he gets his hands on the defensive lineman's chest, it is game over. The pass rush is done, and that part of the offensive line is secure for the remainder of the rep. Now, going into the 2025 offseason, it has been said that Manu has worked pretty extensively with Taylor Decker in the offseason, the player that he would eventually replace once Decker leaves the Detroit Lions. He's worked with Penei Sewell and has received a lot of praise from there, and really, from all accounts, has taken a lot of steps forward in his development at the tackle position. So, the question being, should the Detroit Lions change Giovanni Manu's position? I say no. I think a player that is as athletically gifted as Giovanni Manu is not a player you come along very often. You very rarely find an offensive lineman who is 6'7", 350 pounds with the length and the power that Giovanni Manu has. The Eagles have a player just like that in Jordan Mailata, and he is one of the best left tackles in the NFL. That is the ceiling for Giovanni Manu, and why I think immediately next season he could be a very strong guard candidate and could be a great player at guard. I think limiting that potential, limiting that development to turn into an all-pro left tackle isn't worth giving up, because I trust Hank Fairley to get it done. I trust Brad Holmes to have made the right decision, and even if it's a pick that doesn't pay off until 2026, 2027, I think eventually you could see that pick pay off and he could turn into one of the best tackles in the NFL. And that type of player is not easy to come by. It is not a decision you should take lightly in terms of turning him away from that development path. So, in my opinion, they should stick him at tackle, see where he is this season. And if he doesn't develop, maybe he doesn't develop. If he isn't the player you want by year 3, maybe you do push him to guard. But especially in year 2, in such a crucial developmental season for Giovanni Manu, I see no reason to move him to guard. But with that being said, that's just my opinion. Let me know down in the comments below what you think about his development cycle. Do you want him to stay at guard? Do you want him to stay at tackle? I'd love to hear your guys' opinions about the positional move. But with that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.